The inaugural multilateral summit with Africa kicked off today in Korea. On day one, key cooperation was addressed for critical minerals and digital transition, among others. South Korea has officially suspended all clauses of the 2018 Inter-Korean Military Agreement, following North Korea's repeated provocations. Inflation continued to slow in May, staying below 3%, though fruit prices remain high. Import tariffs for certain items will stay lower in the second half of the year. It's June 4th, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Min. President Yoon held a summit with 48 African nations on Tuesday, the first ever multilateral between Korea and the member states of the African Union. Under the theme of the future we make together, the two sides discussed how to pursue shared growth, sustainability, and solidarity. We connect now to our correspondent Oh Soo-young at the International Media Center. Soo-young, President Yoon and the Mauritanian counterpart, who is also the chair of the African Union, just held a press conference. What were the main outcomes of this summit?
Good evening, Tongin. Yes, the press conference, as you noticed, was wrapped up just a few minutes ago, and this was after the first day of the Korea-Africa Summit, which saw 48 countries attend, represented by almost all the African Union countries. And President Yoon and African Union Chair President Mohamed El Ghazouani of Mauritania, they highlighted 7 major areas of cooperation under the theme of the summit, which was shared growth, sustainability and solidarity. Now, first, to promote trade and investment, the two sides agreed to pursue an economic partnership agreement and a trade and investment promotion framework to promote more corporate exchanges. Seoul will also aim to expand its official development assistance to Africa to $10 billion by 2030, as well as provide some $14 billion of financing for Korean companies to tap into the market of some 1.4 billion people. Now, South Korea and the participants from Africa also signed MOUs on building infrastructure, including roads, rails and ports, as well as deals to strengthen cooperation on food security, sustainable farming, basic health facilities and personnel. The two sides in particular struck a deal to establish a dialogue channel on critical minerals, which are core components for advanced digital products like semiconductors, South Korea's main export item. As of 2022, South Korea has only 36 mineral mines to back the sector, compared to the United States' more than 1,900 and Japan's 134, according to the Federation of Korean Industries. Amid various regional and global challenges to peace and security, the two sides agreed to increase cooperation in counter-terrorism and humanitarian support. They also emphasized the international community's push for the complete, verifiable and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. To further increase solidarity, the two sides agreed to expand exchanges between governments, businesses and parliaments, as well as in culture, sports and academia.
Well, this is, of course, the first of its kind. In what ways is such cooperation significant?
You're exactly right. It is South Korea's very first standalone multilateral summit with the countries of the African Union. Of course, 48 were represented today, 33 of them by their heads of state. And that's actually all member states of the African Union, except for the 6 that are currently they're currently under sanctions. They're suspended following military coups that overthrew their governments. Now, admittedly, this summit does come rather belatedly compared to countries like the United States, the European Union, Russia and Japan. But both South Korean and African countries have been eager to collaborate, with South Korea sharing its experience of developing from one of the world's poorest nations to one of the most advanced economies and an IT powerhouse. Africa, meanwhile, is very dynamic and it has a young population and is blessed with natural resources. Amid shared global challenges such as climate change, pandemics, natural disasters, food crises and, of course, supply chain vulnerabilities, The two sides are looking to strike up a dynamic partnership, which is why we saw some 46 documents, including MOUs, inked today. Their cooperation is also meaningful as African nations hold the most votes in the United Nations, and around 40% of Security Council agendas are related to the continent. The two sides agreed to increase their solidarity at the Security Council, where South Korea and 3 African countries are serving non-permanent terms. That's, of course, also where world leaders discuss and respond to North Korea's nuclear threat and missile provocations. Now going forward, to further develop their cooperation, Korea and African countries agreed to hold a foreign ministers meeting in 2 years' time and establish high-level consultative bodies on economic cooperation and agriculture.
Lots to discuss. All right, thanks for your coverage, Soo-young. South Korea and African nations have long enjoyed diplomatic and economic exchanges, and according to President Yoon and the participating African leaders, this first Korea-Africa summit marks a new chapter. For a closer look, here is our correspondent Kim Do-yeon.
At the first Korea-Africa summit, with 48 African nations represented in South Korea, President Yoon opened what he called a new chapter of friendship, saying that this summit confirms African nations as critical partners of South Korea, while noting that the two sides have been there for each other during tough times.
1950년 6.25 전쟁이 발발하자 아프리카는 파병과 물자 지원을 통해 대한민국의 자유민주주의 수호에 기여해 주었습니다. 1950년대부터 70년대까지 많은 아프리카 국가들이 차례로 독립을 이룩하면서 우리와의 수교는 더 활발히 이루어졌습니다.
He also noted that the summit opens a new chapter in relations. African Union Chair and Mauritania's President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani opened the response from African nations, showing his hope for enhanced cooperation.
I believe that the very reason African nations are attending this summit is because African countries are expressing their steadfast trust and gratitude towards South Korea.
Rwandan President Paul Kagame said, quote, "South Korea is a global pivotal state. Africa is a global pivotal continent. This summit should have happened sooner. South Korea needs to share its experience of success, while Africa has a lot of must-learns from South Korea." And the Central African Republic president said, "We request South Korea to develop human resources for the conservation and development of Africa's vast forests. We hope for mutual growth between Korea and Africa through decarbonization." This two-day event was held just outside of Seoul in Goyang, Gyeonggi-do Province at Kintex, the largest exhibition facility in South Korea.
This is the biggest multilateral summit that the Yoon administration has hosted. It was much anticipated after President Yoon himself announced the plan to host the inaugural summit back in late 2022.
With a number of participants, just the welcoming and greeting of all leaders took more than an hour in the morning. Covering the summit were reporters from all around the world, with different languages being heard at the media center to show the diversity this summit comes with. Following the morning session, the leaders gathered for a photo shoot, lunch, closing ceremony, and the joint press conference. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Also at the Korea-African summit, media outlets from several different African countries showed great interest in the possible outcomes from the summit. Park Go-nu takes a closer look.
I'm here on the first day of the historic 2024 Korea-Africa Summit held here in Korea. The event not only drew attention domestically, but also from dozens of media outlets in Africa. Let's get their take on the event.
Us creating a relation in terms of probably exchange, trade, and also in terms of companies, Korean companies setting up in Africa and especially in Eswatini, so that we can benefit in terms of creating jobs and obviously innovation and things like that.
He added the combination of Korea's advanced technology and Eswatini's various mineral resources could help their country develop. A media representative from Malawi also shared the same sentiment, but mentioned potential cooperation in tourism and agriculture.
And another aspect is tourism. Our country is looking forward to have as many tourists as possible coming from different countries, including Korea. Most of our farmers are still using the traditional ways of farming, advanced equipment like tractors that we know for sure that Korea does have these kind of modern equipment, agricultural equipment. So we are looking forward into those aspects of saying that Korea can help us to invest in these sectors of agriculture.
He added that the Korea-Africa Summit should act as a place where real deals between Korea and African countries actually are promoted. Park Geonu, Arirang News.
Africa boasts over a billion-person market and abundant natural resources. Our Moon Hae-ryun has the details on potential partnerships to explore between Korea and Africa.
Africa is an extremely diverse continent with a wide range of low, middle and high-income economies. The World Bank dubs Sub-Saharan Africa the world's largest free trade area, with a 1.2 billion-person market as well as being rich in natural resources. This is what makes the continent an attractive partner for economic cooperation, as the issue of secure supply chains for raw materials becomes more and more important in South Korea. During the 4th Korea-Africa Forum back in 2016, both sides agreed to enhance their economic cooperation, as well as collaboration in other sectors such as science and technology, human resources, and fostering the younger generation. But over the past 10 years, progress has been somewhat stunted.
It only accounts for about 1 to 2% of Korean exports and 1 to 1.5% of Korean imports. And the big reason for that is that African GDP as a region is still very small.
Africa's global share of GDP is around 5%, while South Korea's accounts for 1.6%. This means that the GDP of the whole region equates to just 3 times that of South Korea. The low GDP combined with the geographical distance has made trade difficult, along with the political instability in certain areas that have made it a risky region to do business with. However, the International Monetary Fund has set optimistic forecasts for economic growth in the sub-Saharan region, predicting that this will rise from 3.4% last year to 3.8% this year after 4 turbulent years.
We have to remember that the African continent's share of population is about 18%. So they have a vast room to grow, and they are less developed, so they have a lot of demand for infrastructure investment. And in order to make infrastructure investment, they will have a lot of demand for financing.
South Korea and Africa also share a major issue affecting many regions around the world: global warming, which affects crops and other natural resources. Consumer prices in South Korea are skyrocketing with large price hikes for fresh produce, while the World Meteorological Organization reported that more than $8.5 billion worth of economic damages were wrought in Africa by climate-related hazards in 2022. With the shared interest in tackling global issues and untapped potential in trade and infrastructure investment yet to be explored, the summit, talks and business forum are expected to boost economic cooperation in the future. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
In other news, South Korea has officially suspended the entirety of the 2018 Inter-Korean military agreement. The decision came amid North Korea's recent series of provocations. Our North Korean affairs correspondent Kim Jung-soo explains.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has signed the motion that was passed by the cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning to suspend all clauses of the 2018 Inter-Korean military agreement.
The government has decided to suspend all effectiveness of the September 19th military agreement until mutual trust between the two Koreas is restored, effective Tuesday, June 4th, as of 3 p.m., after the decision of the cabinet and the president's approval.
The 2018 Inter-Korea military agreement was aimed at diffusing military tensions and preventing accidental military conflict at the border. But military officials, including South Korea's defense minister, have argued that the agreement compromises South Korean military readiness.
Since signing the agreement, North Korea has deliberately and repeatedly conducted violations and provocations, including firing artillery shells off the coast, firing missiles beyond the NLL, firing at guard posts, and infiltrating with small unmanned aerial vehicles.
Back in November, North Korea declared a virtual termination of the September 19 military agreement. This came after Seoul partially suspended a clause on aerial reconnaissance following North Korea's launch of a military spy satellite the night before.
Despite North Korea's repeated violations and provocations, our military has continued to abide by the agreement. However, since failing to launch the military reconnaissance satellites back on May 27th, the North has launched missiles, sent large-scale balloons carrying waste, and jammed GPS systems, gravely threatening the safety of our people and causing property damage.
The deputy minister added that the North Korean regime is solely responsible for the turn of events and warned of a firm response should the North engage in further provocations. With the suspension in effect, the deputy minister hinted of the possible resumption of military drills near the military demarcation line and the Northwest Islands. Such drills had been restricted by the agreement. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
South Korea and the U.S. will hold their third Nuclear Consultative Group meeting in Seoul next week. South Korea's Defense Ministry said on Tuesday that the session will be led by South Korea's Deputy Defense Minister for Policy, Cho Chang-rae, and Principal U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy, Vipin Narang. They will discuss the details of their shared strategy to deter North Korea's nuclear threat. Shifting gears, inflation continued to slow in May, staying below 3%, though food prices remain high. Import tariffs for certain items will stay lower in the second half of the year. An Sung-jin brings the latest figures.
Inflation in South Korea is showing signs of slowing down, yet prices of fruits and oil still remain high. Data from Statistics Korea released on Tuesday show the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, had stabilized year-on-year at 2.7% for May. This is the lowest since last July. Inflation has been hovering in the 2 to slightly above 3% range for the past month. However, fruit prices have jumped by nearly 40% compared to 2023. Apples cost around 80% more, while pears cost around 120% more. It's the highest year-on-year rise for pears ever. Oil prices have also been hiked to their highest in 16 months. During a ministerial economics meeting on Tuesday, Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok pledged to reduce the burden on people by extending import tariff cuts for fresh produce, including 28 fruits, into the second half of the year.
With inflation remaining high, difficulties in the livelihoods of people continue. All departments in the government will do their best to stabilize the economy.
Core inflation, which excludes these volatile items such as food and energy prices, rose by 2.2%, showing a relatively stabilized flow. The finance minister noted that without external shock factors, inflation should stabilize to the lower to mid 2% range in the latter half of this year. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
Amid the ongoing medical dispute, the government has announced measures that will ultimately allow hospitals to accept the resignation letters submitted by trainee doctors. As yet, no significant movement has been seen by the residents. Choi Soo-hyung has the latest.
The Ministry of Health announced on Tuesday that it will leave the order prohibiting the acceptance of resignation letters submitted by residents to their hospital directors. All orders being given to residents will be halted the same day.
Starting Tuesday, the government is withdrawing orders for hospital directors to accept resignations and for residents to return to work and maintain patient treatments. This will allow residents to decide individually whether to return to their hospitals.
It added that in over 3 months of operation by its emergency response system, changes were inevitable to entice the return of the residents and to reduce the fatigue of medical staff caring for the trainee doctors. Currently, over 13,000 residents have left their hospital positions to protest the government's medical reforms, including the expansion of the medical school quota. They now have the option to look for work elsewhere if they don't want to return to their regional hospital. The government stated that it was time to allow the residents to resign as they wished, enabling them to continue their training at any hospital since the medical school quota expansion has been finalized. Only about 8% of the residents have gone back to the hospital so far, but the ministry added that it hopes many more will return. However, the majority of the trainee doctors are holding firm in their stance not to return to work. Immediately after the announcement, Park Dan, the head of the Korean Intern Residents Association, posted on Facebook that nothing had changed. Also, hospitals have doubts about whether residents in essential medical services such as surgery, obstetrics and gynecology will return. Many residents don't want to due to the burden of medical lawsuits and the relatively harsh training conditions they have to endure. Meanwhile, the Korean Medical Association, which had warned of a bigger fight, is holding a vote until Friday on a nationwide strike, including private protest doctors. Medical professors at Seoul National University have also announced that they will conduct a vote on a further strike. The ministry stated that if the residents return, working conditions will be different from before. Minister Cho said that returning residents will have an adjustment process for the training gap to ensure they can take the specialist exam, while additional support will be given to residents who remained at work and did not join the collective resignations. It said that the residents could focus more on their training under the new measures that include amending the medical law to remove the pressure of possible lawsuits and reducing their continuous working hours. Hyung, Arirang News.
Over in Japan, the Tokyo Electric Power Company completed on Tuesday its 6th ocean discharge of wastewater from the defunct Fukushima nuclear power plant. According to Kyoto news agency, TEPCO has disposed of about 7,800 tons of treated radioactive water into the sea since May 17th. Tokyo says no problem has been found regarding tritium concentrations so far. Japan has dumped about 47,000 tons of wastewater into the ocean since last year, after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami disaster. It could start its 7th round of releasing wastewater later this month. Turning to the war in the Middle East, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the peace proposal outline that he has announced earlier was not the full plan. This as he faces pressure from some far-right ministers. Shin Ha-young has more.
Facing strong opposition from far-right members of his coalition to a new Gaza ceasefire proposal, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Monday that a plan announced by U.S. President Joe Biden on Friday was only a partial outline of Israel's proposal. President Biden said Israel had proposed a three-phase plan that includes a partial and then complete release of hostages, as well as a phased withdrawal of Israeli troops. However, Netanyahu emphasized that the war would continue until Hamas is eliminated.
We are working in countless ways to return our hostages. We have gone the extra mile to bring them back. But during this action, we have maintained the goals of the war, and primarily the elimination of Hamas.
In response to Biden's announcement, Israel's Minister of Finance and the National Security Minister threatened to resign and topple Netanyahu's coalition government if he went ahead with the plan. The U.S. State Department countered increasing Israeli criticism of Biden's remarks by stating that the plan was ultimately an Israeli proposal.
It was an Israeli proposal. Obviously, it was a proposal that they developed in consultation with the United States and Qatar and Egypt, the three countries that have played the mediating role throughout this process, but this was ultimately an Israeli proposal.
According to the White House, during a phone call with Qatar's emir on Monday, Biden affirmed that Hamas is the only obstacle to a complete ceasefire and confirmed Israel's readiness to move forward with terms he set out last week. In a joint statement on Monday, G7 leaders said they stood behind the proposal and called on Hamas to accept it. On the same day, the South Korean government announced its full support for the peace proposal, urging all related parties to promptly accept and faithfully implement it. 신하영, Arirang News.
While the whole country is clear today, early summer heat continues everywhere. The temperature in Seoul rose to 29 degrees Celsius. Usually the daytime temperature is around 27 degrees at this time of year, but it's already exceeded that. The temperature in Seoul is expected to rise a little more in the coming days. The early heat will be at its peak tomorrow. Seoul is expected to reach 31 degrees during the daytime. As the temperature rises quickly during the day, the atmosphere becomes unstable and there will be frequent showers. It will rain in many areas tomorrow except the Seoul metropolitan area. On Thursday, rain is forecast to be in Gangwon-do province and Jeju Island. It will rain this weekend as well. Please track the latest weather information carefully. Tomorrow, Seoul will start off at 18 degrees, Chuncheon and Daegu 14 degrees. It will move up to 31 degrees in Seoul, Chuncheon and Daejeon 30 degrees. Early heat will gradually ease off a little with rain on Thursday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session up next.